In a small, weathered village where the sun often hid behind gray clouds and the wind whispered tales of sorrow through the cracked windows of modest homes, there lived a girl named Amina. She was quiet, with eyes that held the depth of 1,000 unspoken stories, a stillness about her that spoke volumes more than words ever could. Her life was a series of muted days, spent mostly in the shadows of a house filled with coldness, not the chill of winter but the deep, unyielding chill of neglect and harshness. Amina's world was small but precious. In the corner of her tiny room sat a worn doll, its fabric faded and patched with care by her own hands. This doll was her constant companion, the keeper of her secrets and the bearer of her silent sorrows. She had named it Nia, a name whispered in soft tones, almost as if speaking aloud would shatter the fragile comfort it provided. Nia was more than just cloth and stuffing. She was a beacon of warmth in a house that offered none. Her stepfather, Cato, was a man whose heart seemed as hardened as the cracked earth outside their home. His presence was oppressive, a looming shadow that darkened even the brightest corners of Amina's life. His words were sharp, his punishments swift, and his love was absent, replaced instead by a cold indifference that weighed heavily on her every breath. The house echoed with his gruff commands and dismissive tones, while her mother, worn and weary, often looked away, powerless against his domineering nature. Despite the harshness of her surroundings, Amina found solace in her moments alone with Nia. When Cato's voice rose in anger or when the cold silence became unbearable, she would retreat to her room, clutching the doll tightly to her chest. With Nia, she could imagine a world where kindness existed, where gentle hands soothed pain and where laughter was not a stranger. The doll's stitched smile was a small, defiant flame against the darkness that threatened to consume her spirit. Each day, Amina carefully mended the doll's worn edges, a silent ritual of love and hope. She would whisper stories to Nia, tales of faraway lands, enchanted forests and brave heroines who overcame great odds. In these stories, Amina saw herself reflected, strong, fearless and free. The doll was her anchor, a tangible piece of her dreams in a life that often felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Cato's disdain for the doll was evident. He saw it not as a source of comfort but as a symbol of weakness, a distraction from the real world, where survival was harsh and mercy was scarce. Whenever he found Amina lost in her imaginary worlds with Nia, he would sneer, "That silly rag won't save you from life's hardships." His words, heavy with contempt, only deepened the bond between girl and doll. If the doll was her weakness in his eyes, it was her strength in the quiet corners of her soul. The village around them was no stranger to hardship either. Stories of misfortune were common and superstition ran deep. Many whispered about the family's troubles, pointing to Amina's stepfather as a man cursed by his own bitterness. But to Amina, these outside voices were distant echoes, barely penetrating the thick walls of her world. Her focus remained on the delicate thread that tied her to hope, Nia. One night, as the wind howled fiercely outside and the sky threatened rain, Amina sat by the flickering light of a single candle. She cradled Nia close, feeling the warmth of the doll's presence seep into her trembling hands. The house around her was silent save for the occasional creak of old wood and the faint breathing of her mother in the next room. Yet in that stillness, Amina felt a spark, a fragile glimmer of something beyond the pain and cold. It was in these moments that the girl's resilience shone brightest, even if no one else saw it. Though she spoke little, her eyes held stories of endurance and a spirit unbroken by the harshness of her stepfather's rule. And as the night deepened, with only the quiet company of her doll, Amina dreamed not of escape, but of a day when her world might be filled with light and warmth, a day when the cold would finally thaw, and she could live not in silence but in song. The air in the small house always seemed heavier when Cato was near, thick with a suffocating tension that settled over every corner like a dark cloud. His presence was a storm, unpredictable, fierce and merciless. No one could predict when the tempest would strike, but its marks lingered long after the fury had passed. For Amina, the stepfather's wrath was not just a threat but a constant, looming reality that shaped every breath she took. Cato was a man tormented by his own bitterness, a man whose heart had been hardened by years of disappointment and failed dreams. The villagers whispered of his past, stories of a boy who had lost everything he loved, growing into a man who sought to control and dominate the few things left in his grasp. But none of these stories mattered to Amina in the cold, lonely moments when his anger found her. To her, Cato was simply the source of relentless cruelty, a force determined to break her spirit and reshape her into someone he could command. His hatred for the doll Nia was no secret. It was not just a simple dislike but a fierce, burning contempt. To Cato, the doll represented everything he despised: softness, vulnerability, and a refusal to bow to his will. Whenever he caught sight of Nia, nestled in Amina's arms or sitting silently by the window, his eyes darkened with fury. "That rag," he spat one evening, his voice low and dangerous, "is nothing but a chain that binds you to weakness." The doll, to Cato, was more than a toy, it was a symbol of defiance. He saw how Amina clung to it not just for comfort but as a shield against his harshness, and this only fueled his desire to crush her fragile refuge. He could not stand the thought that a piece of cloth, stitched and worn, held more power over the girl's heart than his own voice or his punishments. His cruelty was methodical, a cold, calculated effort to erode Amina's will bit by bit. He forbade her from spending time alone with Nia, calling it a childish obsession that needed to be stamped out. When she disobeyed, the punishments were swift and harsh: a glare that could freeze the blood, a word sharper than a blade, or a shove that sent her sprawling across the dirt floor. Each act was a deliberate strike aimed not just at her body but at the very essence of her hope. Behind his rage there was a deeper, darker jealousy, a venomous envy of the bond between Amina and the doll. Cato could not fathom the depth of that connection, how something so fragile could carry the weight of a child's suffering and dreams. It was a bond forged in silence, in whispered prayers and stolen moments of peace, and it was a bond he was determined to sever. One night, after a particularly brutal day marked by broken promises and shattered hopes, Cato sat in the dim glow of the hearth, his mind churning with dark resolve. The flickering flames cast twisted shadows across his face, shadows that mirrored the turmoil within. He had watched Amina retreat into her world with the doll, and in that retreat he saw a rebellion that could not be tolerated. "This ends," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, the words heavy with menace. His plan was cold and final. He would rid himself of the doll, bury it deep where it could never return, and in doing so he would strip Amina of her last defense. Without Nia, he believed, the girl would be broken, malleable, and finally under his complete control. The thought of the doll's destruction stirred a twisted satisfaction in him. He envisioned the moment when the last thread of comfort would be severed, when Amina's world would collapse into silence and obedience. It was a cruel vision, born from years of anger and a desperate need for dominance. But even in the depths of his wrath, Cato underestimated the bond between a girl and her doll, a bond that was not so easily destroyed, and a spirit that was far stronger than he could ever imagine. The doll, worn and weathered though it was, held not just memories and comfort but a silent power that even Cato's fury could not extinguish. As the night deepened, Cato's plan solidified into a dark promise, a promise that would set in motion a chain of events neither he nor Amina could foresee. The doll was more than a rag, more than stitched fabric. It was a symbol of resistance, and in his desire to bury it alive, Cato was unknowingly awakening a force far beyond his control. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a cold, silver glow over the small clearing behind the crumbling house. Shadows stretched long and thin, weaving through the ancient trees like ghostly fingers searching for something lost. The air was thick with a heavy stillness, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for the darkness to break. Cato's heavy boots crunched against the dry leaves and brittle twigs as he made his way to the spot he had chosen. His face was set in a hard, unforgiving line, eyes gleaming with a cruel determination. In his hands he held the doll, Nia, wrapped tightly in a ragged cloth stained with years of tears and dirt. The doll's once bright eyes were now dull, its fabric worn and torn, but to Amina, it was still a beacon of hope, a silent friend in a world that offered her little kindness. Behind him, in the shadows of the broken doorway, Amina stood motionless, her small frame trembling but her gaze fixed on the ground where her beloved doll was about to disappear forever. She said nothing. The words were caught in her throat, swallowed by the fear and helplessness that weighed heavily on her heart. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating, as if the earth itself mourned the loss about to unfold. Cato's voice broke the quiet, cold and sharp. "This ends tonight," he said, his tone devoid of any mercy. "No more hiding behind that ragged thing. You will learn to live without it." He knelt down and began to dig with his bare hands, clawing at the earth with a ferocity born of years of bitterness. The soil was dry and crumbly, resisting his efforts, but he did not relent. Each handful of dirt tossed aside seemed to weigh heavier on Amina's heart. She watched as the hole grew deeper, a dark pit that seemed to swallow the light itself. When the hole was deep enough, Cato carefully placed the doll inside, its small body cradled by the cold earth. The rag was peeled back, revealing the worn fabric and faded stitches, the once cheerful face now obscured by shadows. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, Amina's heart pounding so loudly she was sure Cato could hear it. Then, with deliberate cruelty, Cato began to shovel dirt back into the hole, burying Nia alive beneath the earth. Each scoop of soil was a silent hammer blow, sealing away not just the doll but the last flicker of comfort in Amina's shattered world. The dirt muffled the cries that Amina refused to let escape her lips, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The ground was soon level again, a small mound of earth marking the spot where her only friend lay buried. Cato stood up, his chest heaving with dark satisfaction. "That's where it belongs," he said coldly, turning his back on the silent girl. But as the night deepened, something strange began to stir beneath the surface. The earth around the grave seemed to pulse faintly, a slow and rhythmic thumping like the heartbeat of something alive. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sound that was almost a whisper, a soft, scratching noise as if something was trying to claw its way back into the world above. Amina's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Though Cato was gone, the weight of the night pressed down on her, filled with a strange mixture of fear and hope. The doll was buried, yes, but the bond they shared was far from broken. In the quiet darkness, the earth shifted again, and tiny fingers of soil began to move aside. The worn fabric of Nia's dress appeared, then the face, pale and determined. Slowly, inch by inch, the doll clawed its way back to the surface, as if the very spirit woven into its seams refused to be silenced or forgotten. Amina watched in stunned silence, tears of disbelief mixing with a flicker of hope. The doll was alive, not just in memory or love, but in a strange, eerie reality that defied the cruelty of the night. And though the stepfather's wrath had tried to bury it, the doll's journey back to her was a silent promise that no darkness could ever truly extinguish the light of resilience. Far from the house, Cato slept, unaware that his act of destruction had awakened something far greater than his anger, a force that would reach beyond the earth, beyond the pain, and back into the heart of the girl he sought to break. The days that followed the burial were heavy with an unnatural stillness. The village seemed to hold its breath, as if it too waited for something to stir beneath the soil. For Amina, the quiet was a restless one, filled with subtle disturbances that she couldn't explain but felt deep within her bones. Each morning, she would wake to find the earth around the small mound where her doll had been buried slightly disturbed, as if something beneath was trying to break free. One dawn, as the first pale light spilled over the horizon, Amina slipped quietly outside, drawn by a strange pull she could not resist. The ground beneath her feet felt different, alive, almost breathing. Tiny holes had appeared in the dirt, like the delicate scratches of small claws trying to escape confinement. The earth trembled ever so faintly, sending a shiver up her spine. She knelt by the patch of disturbed soil, her fingers brushing the tiny holes, feeling the warmth of the ground beneath despite the cold morning air. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope. Was it possible that Nia, her beloved doll, was truly coming back? The thought filled her with a strange courage she hadn't known she possessed. Yet, she dared not speak aloud for fear the restless spirit might vanish like a dream at dawn. That night, the whispers began. The wind carried soft murmurs through the trees, words woven into the rustling leaves and the sighing grass. Amina lay awake in her small, cold room, the shadows dancing across the walls like ancient spirits awakening from a long slumber. The whispers were faint at first, fragments of voices, half-heard and elusive, but they grew clearer with each passing night. "You are not alone," the voices seemed to say, their tone gentle but urgent. "The bond is unbroken." Amina clutched her thin blanket tightly, tears pricking her eyes. She had always known the doll was more than just a toy, but now it seemed the spirit within it had stirred, reaching out across the veil between worlds to call to her. Strange things began to happen around the village. The earth would tremble beneath the feet of those who had wronged her stepfather, subtle but persistent tremors that unsettled even the bravest men. Small holes and cracks appeared in the ground, strange patterns that some whispered were signs of ancient magic awakening. No one knew what to make of these strange events, but the villagers grew uneasy. One afternoon, while gathering water near the riverbank, Amina noticed the earth shifting near the roots of a great baobab tree. The ground bulged and cracked, and from the soil emerged a small sprout, delicate and vibrant, as if the earth itself was breathing new life. She knelt beside the sprout, feeling a warm energy radiating from it, a sign she knew that the restless spirit of her doll was weaving its way back into the world. As the days passed, the signs grew stronger. The air was thick with a strange energy, a sense of awakening that could not be denied. Amina's dreams became vivid, filled with visions of a small determined figure clawing its way through the earth, reaching for the light. The whispers in the night became a chorus, guiding her toward the truth that the bond she shared with Nia was far more powerful than the darkness that sought to sever it. The village watched with growing fear and awe as the earth responded to a force beyond their understanding. The restless spirit was returning, and with it, a promise that the light of hope and resilience could never be truly buried. The dawn crept slowly over the village, casting a pale light through the cracked window of Amina's small room. She awoke with a start, a chill running down her spine, as though the night had carried a secret she was only just beginning to understand. Her eyes darted across the sparse room, lingering on the empty corner where Nia, the cherished doll that had been buried alive, had once stood in silent company. But now something was different. The soft rustle of cloth whispered through the still air, and there, sitting quietly on the edge of her wooden bed, was Nia. The doll's porcelain face was cracked but unbroken, and its button eyes held a new depth, a glimmer of something ancient, something not quite human. The once soft fabric dress had been replaced by a woven garment that shimmered faintly, threaded with dark earth tones and flecks of silver light, like a cloak spun from roots and shadows. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as she brushed the doll's hair, a tangled mass of dark strands as if woven from night itself. The moment her skin touched Nia's, a surge of warmth flooded through her body, mingling with a strange sense of power and awakening. The doll no longer felt like a simple plaything. It was alive with a presence that pulsed with the energy of the earth, mysterious and fierce. Word of the doll's return spread quickly through the village, carried on whispers and wary glances. The stepfather, who had long ruled the household with cold cruelty, grew pale with dread when he heard the news. His eyes, once filled with anger and scorn, now flickered with something deeper, fear. The very thing he had tried to bury, the symbol of the girl's hope and spirit, had found its way back from the earth's grasp, and with it, a power he could neither control nor understand. That night, the stepfather paced in his dimly lit room, his mind racing with dark thoughts. The restless doll had unsettled him in ways he could not explain. Strange noises disturbed his sleep, the soft tapping of nails on wood, the faint rustle of fabric moving against the floor, and most unsettling of all, the whisper of a voice that seemed to seep through the walls like a slow poison. He tried to dismiss these fears, blaming them on his own guilt and the heavy burden of his deeds. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing night. The doll was no longer just an object, it was a force, a guardian that protected the girl he had tried to break, and it held a power that defied his control. Meanwhile, Amina felt the transformation within herself. The connection to Nia deepened, as though the doll was a conduit to something far greater than either of them had known. She began to sense the ancient magic woven into the threads of the doll's new garment, a power that whispered secrets of the earth and the ancestors. It was a language without words, a rhythm felt deep within the soul, calling her to embrace a destiny she had never imagined. The villagers watched from a distance, their fear mingling with awe. Some spoke in hushed tones of old legends, stories of spirits that could not be buried and curses that turned into blessings. They saw the stepfather's growing unease and whispered that the girl's bond with the doll was a sign, an omen of change that could not be stopped. As days turned into weeks, the stepfather's fear morphed into desperation. He tried to rid the house of the doll once again, but each attempt was met with failure. The doll vanished from sight only to reappear in the most unexpected places, perched on a windowsill, hidden beneath the hearth, or resting atop the stepfather's own bed. Each time, the air grew colder, and a silence fell heavy over the household, as if the very walls held their breath. One night, driven by terror and anger, the stepfather confronted the doll directly. He grabbed it roughly, his hands trembling as he held the now animated figure before him. But the moment their eyes met, a shockwave of power surged through him. His body froze, his breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he saw not a doll but a living spirit, an ancient guardian awakened by his own cruelty. The stepfather's grip loosened and he dropped the doll onto the floor. It stood upright, unbroken and unyielding, its eyes glowing faintly with an inner fire. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the air thick with the weight of an unspoken warning. From that night on, the stepfather was a changed man. His cruel words softened, his angry outbursts faded, and a shadow of fear clung to him like a second skin. He no longer dared to challenge the girl or her doll, for he knew that some forces were beyond his grasp, forces that had returned from the earth itself to protect what he had tried to destroy. Amina too changed. The power that flowed from Nia's return strengthened her resolve, healing wounds old and new. She walked with a quiet confidence now, her spirit intertwined with the ancient magic that had awakened beneath the soil. The doll was no longer just a symbol of comfort. It was a guardian, a protector, and a reminder that even the deepest wounds could give rise to new strength. In the village, the story of the buried doll that dug its way back into the stepfather's bed became legend. A tale of resilience, magic, and the unbreakable bond between a girl and the spirit she refused to let go. And as the seasons turned, the earth whispered once more, carrying the promise that some powers could never be buried, only transformed. The stepfather's nights grew darker and more restless than ever before. What had once been a place of cold dominance and harsh control, the bed where he ruled over his household with an iron fist, became the epicenter of unsettling disturbances that gnawed at his mind and spirit. The air around the bed felt heavy, thick with tension and an invisible weight pressing down on him. It was as if the very fabric of his sanctuary was alive with something ancient and relentless. It began with the scratches. At first they were faint, barely noticeable on the wooden frame of the bed. Tiny, shallow marks etched into the surface, like the delicate claws of some unseen creature testing its way back into the stepfather's life. He dismissed them as the work of restless insects or the settling of the old house. But the scratches multiplied, deepening and spreading, forming strange, almost deliberate patterns that seemed to pulse with a sinister rhythm. Alongside the scratches came the noises. Soft, persistent sounds that whispered through the darkness and pricked at the edges of his consciousness. There was the faint scraping of something digging beneath the floorboards, the muted tapping of small claws against wood, and an occasional low eerie creak that echoed through the night like a warning. These sounds grew louder with each passing evening, invading his dreams and tearing apart the fragile threads of his sleep. The stepfather tried to shake off the growing dread. He told himself it was all in his mind, the stress of the household, the burden of his own bitterness. But no matter how hard he willed it away, the strange occurrences continued to escalate, a haunting symphony that seemed tied to the doll he had buried alive. That doll, the symbol of the girl's innocence and hope, was clawing its way back, determined to claim its place in his world. Sleep became a distant memory. Each night, he would lie awake, eyes wide open, heart pounding as invisible fingers scraped against the bedposts, and shadowy shapes danced just beyond the reach of the candlelight. Sometimes the air would grow cold and heavy, as if the room itself had been submerged in a deep, dark well. The stepfather would shiver uncontrollably, the chill crawling up his spine like the fingers of something alive. He began to notice that his dreams were no longer his own. They were invaded by visions of the doll, now transformed into something more than a mere toy. It appeared before him with glowing eyes and a haunting presence, clawing through the earth to reach him, dragging the weight of centuries in its silent determination. The doll's stitched smile twisted into something fierce, and its tiny hands reached out from the shadows to grasp at him in his sleep. These nightmares left him shaken, trembling with a fear that was alien to his nature. The stepfather, once so proud and cruel, found himself shrinking beneath the relentless weight of the doll's return. He could not escape it. No matter where he hid, the haunted bed and its restless spirit were waiting. One night, the sounds escalated into a crescendo. Scratches and taps turned into frantic scraping as if the doll, or the restless spirit within, was desperately trying to break free from its underground prison. The stepfather sat bolt upright, sweat beading on his forehead as the wooden frame groaned under the unseen assault. He fumbled for a lamp, its dim light flickering as he scanned the room. Shadows writhed along the walls, dancing and twisting in unnatural shapes. The bed creaked and shuddered beneath him, and suddenly, a sharp, deep scratch cut across his arm where it rested on the bedpost. He recoiled, the sudden pain sharp and real, as if the doll itself had reached out from the darkness to mark him. From that moment on, the stepfather's nights were ruled by terror. He dared not lie down, fearing the doll's invisible claws would return to tear into his flesh. The house seemed alive with a restless energy, the boundary between the physical and the supernatural blurred by the unyielding will of the doll's spirit. Rumors began to spread through the village. Neighbors whispered of strange noises heard in the dead of night, the scraping of claws, the whisper of a child's laughter, and the eerie sight of a small figure moving silently near the stepfather's home. Some said the earth itself was restless, disturbed by the injustice done to the girl and her doll. The stepfather's health declined as fear consumed him. His eyes grew wild with sleeplessness, and his once sharp tongue dulled with exhaustion and paranoia. He found himself locked in an invisible battle, trapped in his own home with a spirit he had underestimated. Every creak, every shadow, every breath of wind through the cracks in the walls became a reminder that the doll's curse was real, and it was coming for him. On a particularly dark night, the stepfather awoke to the sound of frantic digging beneath the floorboards. The bed shook violently as if the earth below was shifting and twisting in revolt. The room filled with the scent of damp earth and moss, thick and choking, and the air grew colder than ever before. He could feel the doll's presence pressing against him, a force of nature that refused to be denied. He scrambled out of bed, desperate to escape the nightmare that had become his life. But the moment his feet touched the floor, a sharp pain shot through his ankle, like tiny claws raking through his skin. He stumbled, gasping as the doll's power reached out to him even in the waking world. The stepfather collapsed, tears of frustration and fear mingling on his cheeks. The haunted bed was no longer just a place of rest. It was a prison, a battleground where the girl's lost innocence and the stepfather's cruelty collided. The doll had returned not just to comfort the girl, but to reclaim what had been taken and to exact a quiet, unyielding justice. As the first light of dawn filtered through the window, the stepfather lay trembling on the floor, broken by a power far greater than his own. The doll sat silently on the bed, its eyes gleaming with a victorious glow. The haunted bed had claimed its master, and the balance was beginning to shift. The girl stood at the threshold of the dimly lit room, her eyes steady and calm, the small doll clutched tightly in her hands. The air between her and her stepfather was thick with tension, charged with the silent weight of what was about to unfold. The man who had ruled her life with cruelty now faced something far beyond his understanding, a force born from the very innocence and pain he had tried to crush. For years, the stepfather had sought to break her spirit, to erase every trace of hope and comfort that doll represented. But now the tables had turned. The doll, once buried deep in the earth as a symbol of his wrath and contempt, had returned, not as a powerless toy, but as a vessel of quiet vengeance, pulsing with a strength that was both ancient and inexorable. As the girl stepped forward, the room seemed to darken around her. The faint glow in the doll's eyes grew brighter, casting eerie shadows that danced on the cracked walls. The stepfather's bravado faltered as he saw the transformation, not just in the doll but in the girl herself. Her silence had deepened into a fierce resolve, her resilience carved into every line of her face. He tried to speak, to summon the harsh words that once commanded obedience and fear, but his voice caught in his throat. The power in the room was palpable, a force that crushed his arrogance and left him vulnerable. The stepfather's eyes darted nervously, searching for a way to regain control, but the more he struggled, the more evident it became that he was losing. The doll shifted in her grasp, a small but deliberate movement that sent a chill through the room. It was as if the doll was alive, a silent guardian fueled by the girl's pain and the ancient spirits whispered about in forgotten tales. With every passing moment, the stepfather felt the weight of his misdeeds pressing down on him, a slow, relentless reckoning that no amount of cruelty could escape. The first sign of the doll's power was subtle, a faint scratching sound coming from the floor beneath the stepfather's feet. He looked down, eyes wide with growing fear, as tiny cracks began to spiderweb across the wooden floorboards. The room seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, the air vibrating with the quiet hum of something awakening. Suddenly, the scratches intensified as if countless tiny claws were digging their way up through the earth itself. The stepfather stumbled back, his fear turning to desperate panic. He shouted for the girl to stop, to release the doll, but she remained steadfast, her grip unyielding. The doll's eyes flashed, and the shadows around the stepfather twisted into shapes that seemed to reach out for him, silent accusations born from years of suffering. His face drained of color as the room grew colder, the air thick with a presence he could neither see nor fight. Memories of his cruelty, the cold nights, the harsh words, the pain he inflicted, came crashing down upon him like a tidal wave. The doll was not just an object, it was a manifestation of all the harm he had caused, a physical embodiment of his guilt and the girl's enduring spirit. He fell to his knees, trembling as the scratches carved faint patterns into the floor, patterns that told a story older than the stepfather himself, stories of justice and balance, of wrongs that demanded righting. The doll's power was quiet but unstoppable, a force that transcended human cruelty and pride. The girl spoke then, her voice steady and clear despite the storm of emotions inside her. She told her stepfather that the doll was never just a toy, it was a part of her soul, a piece of her heart that no amount of hatred could bury. She revealed how the doll had protected her through the darkest times, how it had gathered strength from the earth and the spirits of her ancestors. With each word, the stepfather's desperation deepened. He realized that his attempts to dominate and destroy had only fueled a power far beyond his reckoning. The doll's return was not an accident but a reckoning, a balance restored through the quiet vengeance of the innocent. As the room grew colder still, the doll moved once more, this time reaching out with tiny spectral hands that seemed to brush the stepfather's skin. He flinched, a sharp pain radiating through his body as if the doll's touch was searing away the layers of cruelty and fear he had built around himself. Tears welled in the stepfather's eyes, not from mercy but from the crushing weight of realization. The power he had mocked and dismissed was real, and it was now impossible to deny. His control over the girl, over the house, and over himself was slipping away, replaced by the quiet but unyielding force of the doll's vengeance. The girl lowered the doll gently, the glowing eyes dimming but never extinguishing. She stepped back, leaving her stepfather kneeling amidst the shadows and whispers of the room, a man broken by the very thing he had sought to destroy. Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath. The long silence that had followed years of pain was finally broken, not by shouting or violence, but by the quiet power of a doll buried alive, now risen to reclaim justice. The stepfather's fate was sealed in that moment, not by a dramatic act of retribution, but by the slow, unstoppable reckoning that comes when the innocent find strength beyond fear, and when the smallest things carry the weight of the deepest truths. The girl turned away, her heart lighter than it had ever been. The doll's power had done its work, not to destroy but to heal, to rewrite the story of cruelty into one of resilience and hope. The haunted past was no longer a chain but a bridge to a new future, where the girl could finally live free from fear. The stepfather remained on the floor, trembling and defeated, a shadow of the man who had once ruled with iron fists. The doll sat silently beside him, a quiet sentinel of justice, its eyes forever watching, forever guarding the girl who had finally claimed her power. And in that stillness, the house began to breathe again, no longer a prison but a place where wounds could heal, where voices silenced too long could finally speak, and where the quiet vengeance of a buried doll had rewritten the fate of all within. The doll, though small and worn, held a secret far greater than anyone in the village could have imagined. It was not merely a plaything for the lonely girl but a vessel of ancient power, a guardian spirit bound by generations of love, protection, and sacred ritual. The origins of the doll traced back deep into the girl's bloodline, connected to her ancestors who had long watched over her family from beyond the veil of time. As the days passed after the stepfather's reckoning, the girl found herself drawn to the doll with a new understanding. It was as if the doll whispered truths only she could hear, whispers carried on the wind, carried through dreams, and echoed in the quiet moments of her heart. In these moments she saw visions of her ancestors, wise and fierce women and men who had walked the land long before her, protectors who had made a pact to safeguard their descendants through times of hardship. The doll was a symbol of that pact, a physical embodiment of the protection her ancestors had woven into the very fabric of her being. It had been crafted from sacred wood, harvested from a tree that stood at the center of the ancestral forest, a place where the spirits gathered and power was abundant. The fabric that clothed the doll had been dyed with herbs known for their protective properties, and its eyes were made from polished stones said to hold the light of the guardian spirits. Long ago, the girl's great-grandmother, a revered healer and spiritual guide, had commissioned the creation of the doll. She had infused it with prayers, blessings, and spells meant to shield the family line from harm, curses, and misfortune. The doll was entrusted to the eldest daughter of each generation, a sacred tradition passed down like a precious flame. But with the passing of time, the true meaning of the doll had been forgotten by many, except the girl, who held it close even as her stepfather sought to destroy it. This revelation came slowly, through fragments of memories and whispered stories shared by an elderly village elder who recognized the significance of the doll. One evening, as the girl sat beneath the sprawling branches of the ancestral tree, the elder approached, eyes full of knowing warmth. "The doll you carry is not just wood and cloth," the elder said softly. "It is a guardian spirit, bound by love and ancient magic. It carries the strength of your ancestors, their will to protect you even when the world turns dark." The girl listened intently, her heart swelling with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The elder explained how the doll had been crafted during a sacred ceremony, where the spirits of the forest blessed the wood, and the prayers of the ancestors sealed the spirit within. It was meant to guide, protect, and defend the family line, especially in times of great peril. The elder spoke of the curse her stepfather had tried to impose, how it could not break the doll's power because that power was rooted in something far older and stronger than any human malice. The curse had tried to sever the girl's spirit, but the doll's protective force was intertwined with her very essence, a bond that no earthly harm could destroy. As the girl held the doll, she felt a warmth spreading from its core, a deep, calming energy that settled her restless heart. It was a power not of domination but of connection, to her past, to her family, and to the unseen forces that had watched over her since birth. That night, her dreams were filled with visions of the past, women weaving protective charms, men chanting under the moonlight, and the sacred tree standing tall amidst the shadows. The doll was at the center of it all, a beacon of light and strength. In her dreams, the doll spoke to her in a language older than words, a language of spirit and trust. When she awoke, the girl knew she was no longer alone. The doll was not just an object but a guardian that would walk beside her through the darkest paths. With this newfound understanding, she felt her own strength grow, not just from within but from the legacy carried by the doll, a legacy of protection, resilience, and unbroken hope. The stepfather's fear had been real, but it was rooted in his ignorance of the doll's true nature. His cruelty could not touch the spirit that guarded the girl, nor could it erase the deep ancestral magic woven into the doll's very being. The doll's return was a reminder that some powers are eternal, that love and protection transcend human cruelty. In the days that followed, the girl began to see the world differently. She noticed the signs of the guardian spirit in the rustling leaves, the soft glow of the dawn, and the quiet strength in her own heartbeat. The doll was a bridge between the earthly and the spiritual, a reminder that she was part of something much greater than herself. The villagers too began to recognize the change. Whispers spread of the girl protected by an unseen force, a spirit that had returned to right the wrongs done to her. The stepfather, once feared and cruel, became a shadow of the past, overshadowed by the powerful presence the doll now embodied. The girl understood that her journey was just beginning. With the doll's secret revealed, she embraced her role not only as a survivor but as a guardian of the ancient traditions and the living spirit of her ancestors. The doll was no longer just a source of comfort. It was a symbol of her heritage, a protector, and a guide on the path ahead. In this bond between girl and doll, the past and present merged, weaving a story of enduring strength and the unbreakable spirit of those who come before. The doll's secret was a promise that no matter how dark the world may seem, the light of protection and love will always find its way back, digging through the earth, into the heart, and into the lives of those who need it most. ChatGPT said. The girl's discovery of the doll's true nature was only the beginning of a profound transformation. The ancient guardian spirit within the doll held not just protection, but also the power to break curses and free those bound by darkness. The stepfather's cruel oppression, once a looming shadow over her life, now faced a force far stronger, one born of heritage, spirit, and resilience. As the girl grew more connected to the doll's power, she sensed that the guardian spirit was guiding her toward a path of liberation. The whispers she heard in her dreams turned into clear messages, revealing rituals and knowledge long kept hidden. The doll was a key, not only to her safety but to breaking the chains that her stepfather had tried to wrap around her soul. The first step was learning to listen deeply, to quiet her mind and open her heart. In the stillness of dawn, beneath the protective branches of the ancestral tree, she began to practice the meditations the doll's spirit taught her. With each breath, she felt the ancient magic flowing through her veins, connecting her to the strength of those who had come before. She learned to draw energy from the earth, the wind, and the stars, weaving them into a shield of protection around herself and her family. The power of the doll was not something to be wielded recklessly. It required patience, respect, and unwavering belief in the light that could overcome darkness. The girl spent days and nights in quiet communion, practicing the sacred rituals revealed to her through visions. These rituals involved calling upon the spirits of her ancestors, invoking their names and their blessings, and using the doll as a conduit for their protection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, the girl felt a surge of power unlike anything before. The doll glowed softly in her hands, radiating warmth and strength. She knew the moment had come to face her oppressor and break the cycle of fear and control once and for all. The stepfather's presence in the house still carried an oppressive weight, but now it was tempered by a new force. The girl, no longer silent and powerless, stood tall with the doll clutched firmly against her chest. She could feel the guardian spirit's energy flowing through her, a protective barrier that no cruelty could penetrate. When the stepfather confronted her, his usual threats and anger met with calm and unyielding strength. The girl recited the sacred words taught by the doll's spirit, invoking the names of her ancestors and calling down their power. The air in the room shifted, shadows flickered and recoiled as the ancient magic took hold. The stepfather's fury turned to fear as he realized the balance had changed. His attempts to dominate and harm were thwarted by a force beyond his understanding or control. The curse he had tried to impose, the darkness he had sought to bind around the girl's life, began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. But breaking the curse was not merely about banishing evil. It was about restoring harmony, to herself, her family, and the land that had been touched by suffering. The girl understood that the power she wielded was a gift and a responsibility. She used it to heal wounds inflicted by years of neglect and cruelty, mending the broken bonds within her home. With the doll's guidance, she led rituals that cleansed the house and the hearts of those who lived within it. The energy of the guardian spirit spread through the rooms, lifting despair and replacing it with hope. The stepfather, confronted by the strength he could neither break nor buy, slowly lost his grip on the family's life. Neighbors and villagers noticed the change too. The air seemed lighter, the nights quieter, and a sense of peace began to settle over the household. The girl, once lonely and fearful, became a beacon of resilience and courage. Her bond with the doll was a symbol of her triumph, not just over her stepfather's cruelty, but over the darkness that threatened to consume her spirit. The journey to break the curse taught the girl many things: the power of faith, the strength found in connection to one's roots, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. The doll, once buried and forgotten, had become the key to unlocking her true potential and reclaiming her life. As the final threads of the curse unraveled, the girl felt a profound sense of freedom wash over her. The past no longer held her captive, and the future stretched before her like a bright horizon. She knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but with the doll's guardian spirit by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Her stepfather's shadow, once so dark and heavy, now seemed distant and powerless. The curse that had bound her was broken, transformed by the light of ancient magic and the unwavering spirit of a girl who refused to be defeated. In that breaking, a new chapter began, one of healing, growth, and the enduring power of love and protection passed down through generations. The girl's story was no longer one of silent suffering, but of strength and hope, carried forward by the doll's mystical legacy and the unbreakable bond between guardian and child. The air in the house felt different now. Where once there had been tension and fear, a calm had settled, a quiet peace that wrapped around the girl and her family like a gentle breeze. The stepfather's dark hold, once so suffocating and cruel, had finally been broken. No longer did his shadow loom over their lives, and no longer did the girl shrink away in silence. Instead, she stood tall, her spirit renewed and her heart lightened by the strength she had found. The doll, once buried and forgotten, had become far more than a simple toy. It was now a powerful symbol, a guardian of resilience, a beacon of protection, and a reminder of the journey the girl had endured and overcome. Wherever the girl went, the doll went with her, a constant companion and silent protector, its presence comforting and reassuring in a way words never could. In the days that followed, the family began to heal. Slowly, like the first tentative shoots of spring pushing through hardened earth, the walls that had been built by years of cruelty and neglect started to crumble. Conversations grew less strained, and moments of laughter, once rare, began to blossom into small, precious treasures. The girl's mother, who had long been silent in the background, found her voice again. She reached out to her daughter with newfound warmth, and together, they began to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Neighbors and villagers noticed the change too. The house that had once seemed dark and foreboding now carried a gentle light, one that shone from within. People whispered of the mysterious power that protected the girl, the legend of the doll that refused to be buried, and the courage of a child who faced darkness and came out stronger. The girl didn't seek recognition. Her strength was quiet, steadfast, but the respect she earned was undeniable. The stepfather, stripped of his power and confronted by the unyielding force of the girl's spirit and the doll's magic, retreated into silence. His threats no longer held weight, and his presence became a shadow of what it once was. The family, once fractured and fearful, found space to breathe and begin again. In time, the girl learned that the doll's power was not just protection against harm, it was a guide to inner strength, a reminder of the resilience that lives inside each person, even when it feels buried beneath pain and hardship. The doll taught her to listen to the whispers of her own heart, to trust in the unseen forces that support her, and to stand firm in the face of adversity. Her dreams, once filled with fear and confusion, transformed into visions of hope and promise. She saw herself walking through fields bathed in golden light, surrounded by ancestors who smiled with pride and encouragement. The doll glowed softly beside her, a constant symbol of the bond that could never be broken. The family began new traditions, rituals rooted in respect and healing. They honored the doll not as a mere object, but as a sacred protector, a vessel of ancestral power passed down through generations. Together, they celebrated the strength that had brought them through their darkest times and looked forward to the future with cautious optimism. Though the scars of the past remained, they no longer defined the girl or her family. Each mark was a testament to survival, a chapter in a story of endurance and transformation. The doll's presence reminded her daily that no darkness could last forever and that even the smallest spark of courage could ignite a flame bright enough to dispel the deepest shadows. As the seasons changed, so did the girl. She grew into a young woman with a quiet confidence, a heart full of compassion, and a spirit deeply rooted in the legacy of those who had protected her. The doll, once buried in earth and silence, remained by her side, a steadfast guardian and symbol of everything she had overcome. Together they faced the world with strength and grace. The curse that had once threatened to consume her had been broken, transformed into a source of power that nourished her soul. The stepfather's reign of fear had ended, replaced by a new dawn filled with healing, love, and hope. In this new beginning, the girl was no longer alone. She carried with her the wisdom of ancestors, the magic of the doll, and the unshakable belief that resilience could turn even the darkest trials into stories of triumph. The family healed, the home breathed freely, and the future shimmered with endless possibility. The doll remained ever watchful, a silent promise that no harm would come to the girl again. It was a symbol not just of survival but of renewal, proof that from the deepest pain, something beautiful and strong could emerge. And in the quiet moments when the world seemed still, the girl would touch the doll gently, feeling the warmth of its presence, and know that she was truly free. Her journey had been long and hard, but in this new beginning she found peace. The past was behind her, the curse broken, and the promise of tomorrow a bright light shining just beyond the horizon. Together, the girl and her doll walked forward, united, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next.